I have two guests here, and these are the two leading men for strategic foresight in two major institutions. And we are so eager to learn more about their jobs, how they understand strategic foresight, how they are organized, and what they have found out so far. My two guests are Greg in Bristol, Greg Drost. He is the team leader for strategic foresight, working to embed strategic foresight into policymaking, the EU policymaking, through the implementation of the Commission's foresight agenda, including the yearly publication of the Commission's strategic foresight report. The newest foresight report 21 has just recently been published. And my other guest is Chris Luftkeman. He is the leader of the Strategic Foresight Hub at the President's Office of the ETH in Zurich. Both of them have a long history of foresight or policy making. Greg worked, for example, also for at the Commission for the future of work and workplace innovation, social innovation. Chris was, you have a doctorate in architecture from the ETH Zurich, but you also are geologist.
True.
You are structural engineer.
True.
Civil engineer.
True.
And architect.
True.
An entrepreneur. So he has a really big education, and he worked for Arup many years, consultancy. And I asked both of my two foresight experts to give a brief introduction about their mandate. What is expected from strategic foresight at their institution? How are they organized, and how they got become the foresighter of your organization? Greg, do you want to start?
Sure, many thanks, Georges. Let me confirm by saying that I'm not a robot, I'm a person. And two main messages. First, many thanks for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you, even in a virtual form. Many thanks to swissfuture for organizing this and for inviting me. And very warm welcome to all the participants and to Chris. Again, a pleasure. Second, apologies that I'm not able to be with you in person. I was actually really looking forward to it because it was supposed to be my first real travel since 2 years. And then, yes, I think that simply shows how difficult it is to predict even the nearest future. I hope for the next occasion I'll be able to join in person. For a short introduction, I would like to tell you basically 3 things. First, a bit why we do what we do. Second, how we do it. And the third, actually what we do, because that's obviously also very important. Let me start by stressing that strategic foresight came on the EU agenda quite recently. We don't have a 100-year-old history of implementing strategic foresight on our side. It's really became visible in 2019 with the new commission and with the President von der Leyen appointing a dedicated vice president for the very first time in the history of the EU dealing with strategic foresight. It's Maroš Šefčovič, a person that you should know because he's quite big portfolio. He's actually also responsible for dealing with Switzerland. So that's, of course, an important issue as well. But he deals with strategic foresight and better regulation. And I think that's also a very important thing to which I will come back. So that shows that the idea behind the setup of this commission was not really to think about the future, but also make sure that we can embed this future-proof thinking into our policy. And the position of the vice president responsible for those 2 topics really helps. Since you were mentioning the leading people when it comes to strategic foresight, he's certainly this person in the commission. He's the vice president, but when it comes to operational terms, there are two main parts of the commission that deal with foresight, and that's also important in our approach to it. So as you said, I'm a team leader for strategic foresight in Secretariat General. So that's, say, the heart of the European Commission, where we coordinate different initiatives. And we work hand in hand with colleagues from the Joint Research Center that actually do the scientific work, and they do the scientific foresight that then we try to translate into specific policy initiatives. So there is this link between science and policy that we try to ensure by this specific division. We also work close with colleagues from different departments, so we make sure that we coordinate different actions when it comes to strategic foresight. We give specific support to colleagues. So, for example, there are some plans to develop a new initiative. We offer specific foresight support to colleagues that are in charge of it, to make sure that in a quite an easy way, they are also able to embed foresight into their thinking. So we work across the Commission to make sure that foresight is really part of the policy making. We also work very close with other EU institutions, because how much you know about how policies are made in the EU, but of course, it's not only the Commission who's responsible for it, but we have the European Parliament, we have different committees, we have different EU institutions that are part of the policy-making process. So we also ensure that there is this cooperation happening in something that's called ESPAS network. So that's the key for us to coordinate foresight-related initiatives across the EU institutions. And on top of it, there is also coordination with member states. Actually, this year, Vice President Šefčovič launched the network of the so-called Ministers for the Future. So each member state has nominated in its national administration a specific person that is responsible on the national level for foresight. And this way, we also want to ensure that there is this link with what's happening on the EU level, with what's happening on the national level, and vice versa. So there are those different mechanisms in our structures to ensure that there is enough coordination. But of course, it's not just about coordination, it's also about specific products and making sure that foresight actually happens and contributes to policy making. George, you already mentioned the strategic foresight report. So indeed, that's our annual publication that feeds into setting the agenda for the next year. That's something that fits into the State of the Union speech of the President of the European Commission. That's something that fits into the work program of the Commission. So with our work, we're trying to set a bit the tone for what's coming for the next year. Our first report focused on resilience, so setting resilience as a new compass for the policymaking. This year, we focused on open strategic autonomy, so trying to see how the EU can position itself in an increasingly challenging global reality. So I would invite all of you to have a look into this publication. Apart from it, we do smaller foresight reports. Actually, just last week, we published something on green jobs, trying to see how the green transformation can not only help our economies, but what are actually the specific possible outcomes when it comes to the job creation. I think that's something important to convince our citizens that the green transition is not only necessary, but can also bring tangible results. We also work, as I mentioned, with specific DGs. So if there is some interest to develop a new major initiatives, we try to sit down and have a kind of tailor-made approach and show colleagues how they can easily use foresight. I think that's important as well to kind of convince colleagues that foresight is not just either about very high concepts or something that is very theoretical but can also be really of practical use for the work. We just published a new tool that is helping better regulation. So actually, whoever now will be developing a regulation on the EU level can also look at the specific tool that we have designed. We use different foresight techniques and make sure that the new legislation is future-proof. We work in horizon scanning. That's our new pilot project. So that's something where we try to look at the new or weak signals on the horizon and try to see which of those might further develop in the future. That's something that many businesses have been doing already for some time. And I think it's also high time that public administration also makes better use of this tool. And finally, just to add to this quite broad palette of tools that we have, we also developed resilience dashboards. So I mentioned that resilience is kind of a new compass for policy making. It's an interesting concept, basically, that helps you navigate through increasingly challenging reality. But apart from being a theoretical concept, we also want to give concrete tools for governments to help them to measure their own resilience. So try to see how now, in the future, they be able to withstand and successfully transform. So I think that will be it from my side to set a bit the tone, and yeah, happy to engage in a more concrete discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you. I think we have a lot of issues to come back to, but first I would like to ask Chris the same question. What is your mandate at the ETH Zurich?
It's a very good question.
You don't know it.
No. Yeah, so grazie, everybody. It's what we say. It's really great to be here. You know, I never imagined 20 years ago I would be sitting here with you. So I guess I'm a failure as a foresighter. Right? I never imagined even 10 years ago. And I think most of us probably could not have imagined that we would see the remilitarization of our borders, yeah, in our lifetimes. And so it's quite interesting to me when I think of foresight, what our mandate is, what our role is within our organizations, within society, just in general, for ourselves, our families, our friends. And for me, when I met Joël, so I went to the ETH and did my doctorate here in architecture, and many of you paid for my education. So I want to thank you for that. It is a beautiful thing that we have in Switzerland, which is public education. I came here and it changed my life. It put me, my eyes were open to a world I never knew existed. And to me, foresight is very much about trying to open our eyes to worlds which could exist. I grew up in the middle of America, in a middle-class family, and have a family of makers, bending steel and things like that. And I came here, like, wow. And so when I met Joël 3 years ago, and at the ETH Pavilion at WEF, and we got to talking, and he said, look, I'm going to be president, and would you help me by the end of my term, mein Amt, help ETH be fit for purpose to be one of the best universities in the world as it is now? And I said, yes, I would love to come back and help you do this and help make sure that because our only natural resource is what's up here. That's all we have. All right, so how can I make sure that the institution that changed my life continued to do this? And this is what I did. And so our mandate from Joël is to help evolve the foresight muscle, to establish and build the foresight muscle across the institution. And as Greg's trying to bring the foresight muscle to all the member states, how do you have a language which allows you to have a dialogue around the future without confrontation? Dialogue without confrontation, to help create a vocabulary which allows you to build ideas about what could be rather than destroy them. And so this is his first mandate, to bring this into the institution. And the second was for me, because I also do strategy, was to help revise the strategic process, how the ETH works within the ETA domain to make our strategy. We have 4-year strategies. That's, so how do we make foresight and strategy come closer together? And then to, to continue to evolve what our plans are. And to me, I'm a contextualist. This is like, I'm a contextualist. For me, understanding context is everything. Understand the context of a place as an architect, understand the context of the forces that are, as an engineer, the forces which are coming onto something. But for us, trying to understand how to understand and illuminate the story of the context of where we're heading. And I think this is, for me, is to trying to do this. And as a storytelling, because the change is constant. We can't stop it. We might wish it away. We might try to put a lock on it, pretend it can stop. But we are in the midst of massive change. More, I think, in the next 5 years, maybe 10, than we've ever experienced in our lifetimes. And so we have to be ready for that. And Switzerland is very good at waiting. This has been our success factor. We don't want to be the bleeding edge. We're okay with maybe the leading edge, but we want to be definitely right there to learn from everybody else.
Be sure first.
We want to make sure everything's then. We're going to wham, and we're going to take advantage. Now, to me, I'm not sure, will Taiwan be annexed without blood? Will America defend democracy? What will happen when Trump's elected again? What will our country look like without glaciers? Where's our energy going to come from when we can't depend on water being our potential energy source? It's given us basically cheap energy for 2 generations. What then? And these are really profound questions which we need to talk about. These are not things I want. When I said Trump will be elected for the first time, many of my friends didn't speak to me for 6 months. It's not the world I wanted, but our job as futurists is to help talk about things we don't want as well. This is, to me, really important, and also across everything that we do. This is not. So that's sort of where I stand, and I can tell you a little bit more exactly about how we're doing this ETH. And one of my colleagues is here tonight, Nicole Perez, and one of my team. I have 4 people in the team. It's a very small team. I only got to hire 2 of them. The rest I inherited, which is fine. But we have a series of networks. So we were in the office of the president. We've had each one of the members of the Schulleitung. We have a senior member from that creating a council, we'll call it, like the champions, where we talk about future-focused issues cutting across borders, across departments. We cut across the internal Röstigraben. So we have these networks. We have a growing network called the Friends of Foresight, which is any member of our community. It's like Gregor's, any member can join, students, faculty, within the ATAL community, to help them with the language of backcasting, the language of drivers. And then we're also helping the research centers, the AI Center, the Energy Center, think constructively about the future impact of their research. Because faculty typically are problem solvers. They're not necessarily foresighters. And so thinking about what happens after they succeed, and then after, is not what they're trained to do. So we're trying to help them also think about impact, in the sense of the secondary or third impact. And so like AI in law, when the best legal advice you can get is on your phone, what then? What does this mean or not? And then we're also working at the University of the Future. What does this mean with hybridization? We took all of our classes in 1 week, where faculty for 7 to 8 years said it never could happen. We did it in 1 week. Everything was online, labs, everything. And so all of a sudden, this disruptive innovation happened. Now, what does this mean? All right, so what's for the future? And the other thing we're also trying to do is, I'm trying to with the team, and is trying to help also weave together. It sounds like you're doing with this organization, some of the think tanks and how our vocabulary of the future is utilized. So it's non-political, non-partisan, but there's a vocabulary which we can then share, and then the politics can happen afterwards, right? So can we have a shared vocabulary about the future? So then we can talk about, then everyone can figure out what they want to do about it, but at least we can share this vocabulary. And that's what, so I think that we'll have to have another meeting here in Zurich. I invite you to ETH in 2022. So I can keep talking, so I think I'll stop right there. You know, this
Very
is
good. We have a lot of questions. I have some questions in
Sure.
advance, and then I invite you to ask questions to Chris and Greg. The first thing that I wonder very much is, this is our fourth meeting here. And when we had our first meeting, there was no strategic foresight hub at the ETH Zurich, and there was no foresight report at the EU. Why now? Why did those institutions install officially strategic foresight? What is the reason?
Greg?
Thanks.
Why now?
Why only now? Actually, at the commission, the story started even before. I would say under still previous commission, there was quite some substantial work done on foresight. But it's surely, as I already explained through, in its important under this commission. I think the answer is quite simple. And goes back to what Chris said as well. The changes ahead of us are of such a scale that well, we simply also as policymakers, as people working in the institutions, in public administration, we really need new, better tools to help us prepare for what's coming. And that's I think also the expectation from the European or from our citizens as such, and that's the specific context in which the vice president was nominated to work on also on strategic foresight to help the EU navigate through the process of the transition. As you know, we have specific targets. We want to be green, we want to be digital, we want to be more fair, and all of this needs to happen in the world that is changing faster than we've ever expected before. So we cannot stick to the tools that we had previously at our disposal, and we need to be better in trying to see how the future might evolve, and we also need to be better in preparing for it. That's like the two parts that foresight actually offers you to try to see the possible futures, but also something that I really like about it actually is that there's this proactive element. So once you know what's happening, it's your responsibility to really prepare for it. So, and then COVID, I think it was yet another reminder how important it is. So it was another eye opener to many of those who still didn't maybe believe enough in things like foresight, that we need to change the way that we were doing our policies, and we need to do it now. Thanks.
Okay, and at the ETH?
So there was, you might have known Anita Buchli. Anita there was already a strategy team within ETH, or has been, because for many, many, many years. And I was actually coming to join Anita. So the two of us were going to do foresight and strategy, because in the last strategy process, because we're required by Parliament to do a strategy every 4 years. And so in the last 4-year plan, she incorporated an external consultant to do foresight with her. And she liked it, and so did Lino, the president at that time. And they started thinking, how can we integrate foresight more into the process of our strategic planning? So that was already in the works, if you will. And then when I met Joël, that sort of cemented it, because I've been at Arab for 20 years and traveling 2-3 weeks a month all over the world. And so I was tired and wanted to come back to Switzerland, and do what I said and give back. And he said, he was an opportunist and said, I have a plan for you. Come on back. I said, cool, let's do it. And then I joined, and Anita decided that she wanted to take another position. So then Anita left. And so then that's when we took the opportunity to reconsider, how do we do strategy at ETH?
It
So
is.
we stepped out and said, we need to rejig how we do strategy. So the foresight started to build. Now we're going to build a strategy team. And so now then we're going to bring them back together.
I guess it's a little bit the unpredicted that made it more, that created the awareness that we should be dealing more systematic with future issues. And it's also probably a person, you need people who recognize the importance of systematic thinking about future. Was it at the EU Commission the same, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But also, as I said, there was some foresight thinking before. It simply grew in its importance. That's why from the level of the president that really saw it as one of the priorities, found a dedicated vice president to work on it, and then also adjusted different elements in the whole structure to make sure it's not only about talking about things, but also walking the talk at the end of the day. That was quite a game changer, actually.
I think it's probably also the case in the EU. There are other examples of foresight activities being executed across EU in different departments, and also the ETH. The Center for Strategic Studies has been doing foresight studies and strategy for many years, also with our military, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been around the energy scenarios, the climate scenarios, but what we're trying to do is to help bring those together and create a language which then bridge across departments and across professions. And again, to build that muscle. The second part I would say is, I think Joel he has a good feeling for things, right? And I think, we have this good problem of increasing student numbers, and numbers have been going up, and so trying to figure out, what do we do? And so it's like starting to go, what do we do? We have no more space, et cetera, et cetera. And that was interesting. Then our computer science is one of the best departments in the world, so it's very popular. So then where's that going to go? And that's leading computation, AI, the future of AI, the ethical side of it. There's lots of big questions. And Joe's like, can we also take a look at some of these big questions? And that needs to be something that's not inside of the department, but a little bit outside. And that was also part of his thinking when we were talking.
Did the department like that? I mean,
Yeah.
the ETH is a place, different departments, they're really creating future, with advanced cutting edge technologies.
Sure.
And I wonder, did they wait for you? Do they embrace the Foresight Hub now, or do they say, what the heck?
Well,
what shall that be?
There's a cultural context here, George, which, this is not Portugal or Italy or Mexico, where people are always welcoming with open arms. People are a little bit, I'm not sure if I'm going to trust you. You're from the other valley. So there's a cultural reality. So but I have an attitude of respect, and I appreciate what each one does. And I think my goal is there's a push and a pull, right? My goal is not to push, right? I want them to want to pull. I want a department to come to me and say, hey, Chris, we saw what you did with the AI Center. We'd love for you to come and do this with our faculty, because we also want to do this, right? So it's more of a recognition of what Foresight has to bring, rather than shove it down their throats.
So it's not an easy one, this.
I would not say
acceptance.
that. I would not say that, because I haven't tried to push it on anybody. I'm not stupid. I've been in this game for a while, right? So I'm not going to go into a big organization with 500 faculty and go to each one of them and say, you have to talk to me. It's not going to work.
Same question to you, Greg. I mean, politicians are those who think of themselves of creating the future. They're really, politics is a very important place for creating and shaping the future. Did they embrace you when you came with their foresight activities?
Well, at the same time, politics is very much also about dealing with daily business as well, and what's happening every day. So, say that there is tension, increasing tension actually between short-term priorities and next elections and next, poll being done, and the speed with which the information those, and thinking about long-term priorities. So maybe it's not, an obvious thing, but I think it offers politicians interesting opportunity and interesting space to discuss also things that are maybe not very comfortable, or that are not always very much welcome. But I think that's also one of the added values of foresight in creating this space for reflection, and kind of showing how possibly the future might look like, and what the politicians can do to get the scenarios that are more positive rather than those that are more negative, and which might also happen if no action will be taken.
So for me, George, the whole key is how do we help someone else see how what we're doing is relevant to their life, can help them have an advantage or help them understand something which they might have missed. It's the relevance question, how to help make sure that they're relevant.
And can you share an example where you became relevant for them in their point of view?
So, okay.
Example.
Right. COVID's a wonderful time to start anything.
Okay.
Not true. I mean, so for me, what we came, and I was talking with the rectorin, Sarah, and I said, hey, are you thinking about the future of teaching and learning? She goes, yes, I'm doing it all the time. That's my job. I said, wonderful. And do you have a vision for what teaching and learning at ATI will be in 20 years' time? And she sort of cocked her head and said, yeah, I think about that a lot, but we've never actually started putting things down. And this is where so much of the thinking is locked up in one's head. So yeah, I think about that. So, well, have we do it in an organized way? Have you talked with others about this? So then we did a program with the Rectorat and us of you coaching and curating it about a vision for teaching and learning in 2040.
Greg, you do have in the EU, in each country, there is a minister for the future. You mentioned it. How does ministers for the future, how do they work together? Do they have annual meetings? Do they have their own meetings, the minister of the future?
They do. Let me start by saying that they're very happy to have this title, because it sounds very fancy, and they like it a lot. The network of the ministers of the future meets once a year, and it's really more high-level policy debate where each of the countries, each of the ministers brings the national perspective, but obviously it's not enough. So we have two levels of this cooperation, and we have a more practical one as well, where we work with Sherpas, actually, so senior officials from national administration. We meet a couple of times a year to actually work on things that are more of practice, because if you bring 27 ministers and a commissioner together, I mean, the level of discussion will be quite high level, but which is also good and which is fine, and that is also needed. But our ambition with this network is also to help some of those member states that maybe didn't look that much into foresight so far, and help them to understand why it's useful and how it can be done in practice.
Is your foresight team involved in the meetings of the Minister of the Futures?
Well, yes, we have to prepare them. So.
So you prepare the meeting of the Minister of the Future. Very interesting.
It's cool.
That's cool, huh? That's
I
cool.
didn't know that existed.
Well, there you go. So something you can also learn from this event. Happy to share this information, but again, it's something that we would like to see not only as a nice forum, but as a practical tool to help countries move on, and we already see some practical results actually. So some member states that have actually started developing specific teams within their national administration to have foresight in a more done in a more structured and organized way.
Is that a role which people try to get, or are they appointed because they don't have anything else to do?
I guess they had to fight. Well, we asked member states to nominate their own minister. Of course, we couldn't do it for them. And it was an interesting exercise because, again, it showed how different foresight is foreseen across Europe. There were countries where foresight culture is really there for some years, and they have really rich and good experience. And for them, it was natural to find a candidate. There were those where, I guess they had to do even a bit of research to find out what foresight is before finding a victim that could be this minister. So there are really still some differences across Europe.
Interesting.
Greg, unfortunately, we have a little bit trouble with the sound. It's a bit difficult to understand. That's why when I ask you when we go to the 2020 strategic foresight report you recently published, if you allow, I will just give some information to the public, and you can comment on it because it's maybe a little bit difficult to understand.
Do you have a microphone? Do you have a head mic?
I do,
Maybe
but I
on
would have to fetch it first. So
Yeah, if you had a head mic, it might help because I think you're using computer mics, which are a bit difficult.
That's possible.
Yeah.
If you can try. Well, I tell you, the Strategic Foresight Report 2021 identifies 4 global trends. Most of them not very surprising, but I think that's also the nature of foresight. You don't invent something. It's and you don't have the crystal ball to find something nobody knew about it before. But it's you say you bring it in a language. Well, these 4 global trends are climate change and other environmental challenges, digital hyperconnectivity and technological transformations, then pressure on democracies and values. I think that's interesting because yes, we have environment, we have technology. That's obvious, but also these value questions here, and then shifts in the global order and demography. I like to read that because I myself talk about 5 big transformations taking place, and the demographic transformation is not on the focus of many people. They talk about digitalization, they talk about the environment and climate change, but we have also a big demographic transformation. And your point of view is globally. You look at the global development and then ask what it means for the EU. What is also interesting, but I won't read them all, then you define 10 areas of action, which you say that these are the areas of action. And the interesting thing, it seems for me that each of these strategic foresight report has kind of a topic. This time it's autonomy, how the EU can act and create future. Last time you mentioned it was resilience. And you already know what your next report will be. What was the topic there?
The topic of the new one is the twinning, so the relation between the green and digital transition. We want to see what are the synergies, but also what are the specific tensions. That's basically
Excuse me, I want to repeat it. The green and digital transformation. You want the twin of those.
Yes, exactly. So the relation between the two. Well, the reason is quite simple. Both are of strategic importance for the EU. Both have specific targets and objectives that we would like to achieve until 2050. But well, we want to look if implementing those objectives on both sides might also create some tensions. I think the part about synergies is more obvious. But for example, if we think about some different technological developments, we might also want to see how they might affect our climate and green objectives.
And who sets this topic? Is it the Commission?
Well, that's a difficult question. That's something where we need to keep a balance between foresight bringing new views and added value and staying policy relevant. So that's always a result of discussions that we have before to make sure that it's again bringing something new to the table, but also it's relevant for what's coming in policy.
Greg, do you also have major megatrends in mind that you think that's the most important megatrends for ETA Zurich?
No, we're actually, we've been over the past year looking at quite a lot at what's driving change in higher education, because this is our mandate. Like at Arup I was thinking about the world all the time. But we're about to put out there to commission a series of drivers sets. So for this community, it's we're going to be asking for bids to put together what you think would be the global drivers, the Swiss drivers, and the higher education drivers. So it's what's thought.
But obviously, the future of energy, the future of our climate.
That's too generic. I mean, because so our mandate is Switzerland, and Switzerland, of course, is part of a global ecosystem. Right, and that's why we would say the global drivers, the Swiss drivers, and higher education. This is right down, looking at the granularity, and I think so much will be driven by climate change. The migration we're going to be confronted with, and supply chain challenges, et cetera. So climate change for me is, in my view, one of the most important things we have to focus on, and not just the obvious, change of, I said, the glaciers melting, et cetera, but what are all the knock-on effects? And this is to me the cognitive dissonance, which unfortunately many suffer under. It's not going to impact us here. We're doing okay.
You're okay.
We're doing okay, yeah.
It's time for your questions too. Please don't hesitate, and to Chris or to Greg, pose your questions. I'm sure you do have questions. You want to learn more about their jobs as strategic foresighter. Please feel free. Yes, please.
Or before, sure.
I have a question to both of you, but maybe it's also more Greg's part. We see now a strong polarization in our society because of all the COVID discussions, but it's also, for me, it's a sign of polarization in democracy, in how we want to live together. And what are your scenarios for this? It can worsen, it can even cause civil wars. I think even in Europe, we are not far away from that. And but is there also a hope somewhere?
Greg, what do you think?
Did you understand the questions? Because it might be difficult from the microphone.
Okay, you're good.
I did. Well, I think we try to provide some of those answers in our reports. So Georges mentioned that those changes in democracy and values are one of the key megatrends that we looked at. Of course, we always have a tendency to focus on what's more negative. There are some scenarios that point to the even increased levels of polarization, increased importance of fake news and misinformation, all this being used by sometimes internal, sometimes external, sometimes private, sometimes public entities to further increase the level of polarization as well. But I think there is some hope on the horizon as well. It all, I think, boils down to, again, policymakers changing their approach and making sure that the voice of the citizens is actually better heard. We have the new technologies that can help us to better understand what people think and take their voice more into account into what we're doing. We have to experiment with democracy as well. That's a bit what the EU is trying to do with the conference on the future of Europe. That is bringing ordinary citizens into the EU, thinking about the future. And it's basically making sure that people feel heard and that their voice is taken into account in creating new initiatives. And then part of this polarization comes also, as I said, from things like fake news or misinformation. So also as policymakers, we have to be better in finding new ways to fight this type of threats that is only going to increase in the future.
So I'll add on that because, I think I have a couple thoughts on this one. One, the end of empires is always messy, right? History teaches us this. And the empire of whether it's a gender empire, whether it's a political empire, an economic empire, it's always messy when they come to an end. So the question then really is, when will a new equilibrium begin to be found? And where are the signals for that equilibrium? And how do we look for those and how do we find those? And that's what is, we've been talking for almost a decade about the end of capitalism. Because we no longer are really dependent upon the conversion of stuff to get money, because money, there's lots of money everywhere. So what ism are we in? We don't know that. We don't know the economic system we're in. We don't know really the political system that we're all in. So we're in this, for me, a fascinating change of isms. And on one hand, it's the best of times. On the other hand, it's the worst of times. I didn't want the one who said that. But we have an awareness through the internet, through science, through sensors, we know more about our body and our brain than we ever knew before. We're discovering things every week. We now have digital twins of different body organs, so we can test therapies on body organs before we even begin to test them in something that has blood, right? And soon, within the next 5 years, we'll probably have a digital avatar of a body, of a human. And so you think about this, you can be, okay, best of times, worst of times. Scary as hell, right? But really cool. We know what's going on with our climate. We're so aware of our connectivity and our codependency. At the same time, we're seeing this lack of dialogue, this entrenchment, not just here, this is all over. The rise of nationalism, this threat on what we consider our core values, which are not given by a God, which are things we have literally fought for. The question is, how do we defend them? How do we really, hold on to these values which we hold true when we're threatened? It's easy to be very generous when you can be generous. It gets really hard to be generous when you're threatened. And we saw this. I come back to the nationalization of our borders.
Do you think Europe is kind of an empire coming to an end? At least on the demographic change is.
Greg can't answer this question. He'll get way too much
give it
trouble.
to Greg. It's expected that population will decline as the only continent where there's a population decline prognosed by the United Nations is Europe, like 14-15% from now to 2050, a minus. And then I recently had a talk with an expert in globalization, and she was basically saying that the world will be split in spheres, in Chinese spheres and the US sphere, and like a Swiss economy will once have to decide, maybe even universities will have to decide with whom to collaborate. How is your view on the future of Europe? Over there in Brussels at the Foresight team?
Well, that's the moment where I could fake real issues with the connection, I guess. I think there are many of the answers to your question in our latest report, and different factors to take into account. For sure, population-wise, Europe will face an issue or different issues. Our population will get smaller, will also get older. So that has neighborhoods. So in Africa, can you hear me still?
We lost you for a moment. You're back.
Okay, sorry. I was saying that in our direct neighborhood, for example, in Africa, the population growth will be really, actually in Africa, we'll see the most of the global population growth towards 2050. So that will also create some challenges to Europe when it comes to migration, when it comes to possible conflicts just on our borders. And all of it will require specific answers. I guess we might need a new approach to migration. I guess we also need to change our approach to cooperation with the neighborhood. So making sure that the situation in the direct neighborhood of the EU also improves, and that means better quality of life. And then when it comes to those choices with whom to cooperate in the future, I think there are different things to take into account. And one of them are values as well. And that's something we also underline in our report, that we should look at different dimensions, the economic one, at the demographic one, but also about this one related to the values and different ways that we see governing systems.
Yes, and I think especially the future of Africa will be important also for the future of Europe. I have another question here.
Yes, my question goes to both of you, maybe a little bit more to you, Chris, as I could imagine, for example, in the ETH Rat, the presidency, is important that you're close to the presidency, because department themselves, they think they probably know what they want to invest in, their resources for whatever they create for the future. But your reports, so to speak, are somehow a referee game, or you sort of have an advice where to invest more or where to invest less, maybe. And therefore, my question is, who reads your reports? Who do you write them for? Who pays them for? Also for Greg. I mean, you're not so much creating new pictures of the future, but
right. So no, that's a very good question. It's sort of like you have a few nested questions there in one suggestion. So first of all, I don't really write reports. I work with my colleagues and help them go ahead and write the things. So it's not up to me to write the future of teaching and learning. That's the rectorate's job. It's for me to help her and help her team, or like organize their thinking and how do we backcast and things like that. So I don't want to do their job for them, right? The ETH Rat has a process. They're part of the four-year process, which is mandated by Parliament. on the planning process, and they've just finished a sort of a horizon scan and a series of a sort of a Delphi, asking various people their opinions on what was felt to be important. And this is something which ETH Rat wrote. I'm not going to, that's their job. If they would ask me, and I participated in that process as the representative from the ETH. Do I think the ETH Rat should have a foresight team? I think the answer is yes. I think it's too important. And I think the ETH domain is too important for the future of Switzerland not to have one. So I would advocate for that, and I do. And I think it's very important. I think the same thing for Switzerland as a nation. I can't understand why we, as a small nation, don't have a small team focused with our parliament on foresight. Singapore has one, Finland has one. These other small nations have foresight teams, strategic foresight groups. I understand, how we're hyper demographic and Vernehmlassung until we're all sick of it, but it's a really important part. But I still think we should, at the parliamentary level, have a team as a function, just like Greg has one at the EU. Well, they're reconstituted every 4 years, because then the report is created every 4 years, and our military has one, but as far as I know, Turnhead does not have a permanent foresight. I'd be happy to be wrong. And okay.
As far as I know, they used to have one.
Yeah.
They used to have one.
Yeah,
Yes.
but not anymore.
Another question there?
Thank you, especially for Chris. A more practical, down-to-earth question. On the practical side of your work, do you, and it goes to both of you, do you formulate recommendations, or do you make seminars? Do you consult as an entrepreneur on a case-by-case basis? How does your work look in a practical?
Right. So the one project we did with Rectorat, out of that, when we presented the work to the Schulleitung, the results, we'd use a whole series of characters, future characters, students, what they could be, all the things that we would suspect from a scenario exercise, if you will, in Delphi. And out of that, the Schulleitung then decided that we collectively should take a deeper look at hybridization. What does hybrid mean for ETH and education and research and student life and personalization? So they came back, we sat down with 5 different themes which we thought could have a big impact. They said, okay, these are 2 which would have an impact across everything. We also encourage lifelong learning and things like that. Said, okay, we're going to parking that for a moment because this is something someone else is looking at, but these 2, can you continue to help us think about the future of hybridization? Now, we had no specific recommendation saying you need to have an Apple 13 phone for everybody within that, but so we're working with them, right? Again, I come back to, for me, what I want us to do is to collaborate, and have the appropriate Immobilien can then write the recommendations. I'm not going to write those. They know their business, right? And I can help challenge their thinking. This is what we want to do. I'm not going to tell them what they write. And so that's to me very, very important on what we're doing. The recommendations I will make is on how we should be integrating foresight into our strategic processes. I recommend how departments should be incorporating. In my perfect world, in 3 years from now, every student at ETH will have at least one class in their first year where they think about the future. A recommendation, yes, a module when every introduction class, there's one lecture where they think about the future implications of what they've just been learning about. Would I like to have that as a recommendation? Absolutely. Are we there yet? No. But that's what I'm hoping we can get to the point. So that's where, I don't know, Gregor, do you have specific recommendations you make to your ministers of the future?
No. No, just to echo what you said, I don't think it's within our role to have those specific recommendations. It's more to try to give them a bit of food for thought and open their eyes a bit on some of the issues. It's one thing, and second, accompany them, as you said, throughout this journey, because I think sometimes the most interesting results also come just from the foresight collaboration rather than a given report or another paper that we write.
Yeah.
But you do have these strategic areas of policy action, at least.
Yes,
This
but
is,
if you see it,
let's say,
there's
that's
nothing.
kind of recommendation.
It's not a specific policy recommendation.
Can
It's
you
some
repeat that,
area that
please?
we highlight as important, but we don't tell, we don't give like very specific advice. That's not our intention there.
Can you please repeat the last sentence?
I'm saying that we give or we show specific areas that are important, but we don't give specific recommendations in terms of what concretely should be done.
Yeah, yeah. But there's some of them, all of them are really, really interesting. Just give you an example: ensuring sustainable and resilient health and food systems, for example, ensuring first mover global position in standard setting, securing diversifying supply of critical raw materials. These are the kind of field of actions that you do propose in your report.
But the important thing is that we don't say how to do it. No,
yes, not how, only here.
So one of the things I want to follow, because that's actually a really, really good question, right? And the question is, how far do you go, right? And where do you stop? And whether as a consultant, you can negotiate where you stop, right? And for me, a lot of that has to do with the trust and the understanding of what's needed. The trust in that the receiver is willing and interested to know versus, just this is what I think, take it or leave it. And I think and so for me, to me, that's a pull question. If someone wants a recommendation, usually I have a few, but it's not something I push. Right? I don't lack ideas or opinions, but I don't tell everyone those. Right? That's what.
Would you feel misunderstood if I say you're kind of the future coach?
No, I think I'd say, I mean, if I can in 4 years be done with saying, okay, because I have to retire in 4 years because we've required to here. Damn it. If I can retire and then we've actually have a coaching team that's able to continue, that would be fantastic. I like the idea of a coach, very much so.
There's 2 more questions, right? Please start.
Yeah, I've got a question. So what I understood now is, this is my interpretation, what you said, is that you teach more behavior and you don't go to say what is right or wrong. You teach more behavior that people that technical, for example, AI technique, they go to ask themselves, is this okay or is it not okay? We have to think about that by ourselves. And your role is more to teach them the behavior, this thinking that they start to make this question himself. And this is your role. Is this right or?
Behavioral mindset, maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, that's again a really good question. I think what we focused on in the team right now has been trying to develop a series of tools and methods which are appropriate for the ETH community, and to find ways in which we can share and describe those which are meaningful for a student, for a department head, for this whole spider web. And so, and there, our goal is that, again, this is this muscle. They're starting to ask those questions. Yeah, I think if that's what you mean, then I'd say yes. That's what we're definitely trying to do. Yeah.
And next question.
Hi, I'm Mark. I also studied at ETH.
Are you in a part of the alumni association?
Yes, I get letters from them.
Okay.
So yeah, I could talk about many things right now. I could talk about the potential rise of AGI, the polarization which we had, and there's all sorts of problems we can talk about. But let me focus on one thing which may fall within your reach of influence, Chris. Because if I look at the landscape of world problems, and we thread them all together, all threads, or at least their solutions, seem to converge in one thing. And that is, there is nothing more potent in solving them than the distributed, decentralized computing power of the citizenship. And so what I'm aiming at is, in Austria, I have my high school years in Austria. In Austria, the Matura, which is the baccalaureate, has been around since 1792. And the world has turned on itself ever since. There has been an explosion of knowledge in all sorts of fields. And yet, the school system has barely changed, and I mean barely changed. We still have the same alarms every 45 minutes to 1 hour. We still force teenagers against their natural circadian rhythms to get up at 7 or 8. There's so many things wrong with the education system. And I remember at ETH, during lunch, I was talking with my students, and I was shocked to see that the best of Switzerland didn't know that in 1962 it came this close to thermonuclear annihilation. And this is just one of many things. They don't know about intifadas, many other things. There's also philosophy, not just history. And my point is this: how would you go about, in the most efficient, goal-oriented way, to dramatically reform the educational system? And I mean dramatically to accommodate the change of the world proportionally with the change needed in the educational system.
Obviously, by the way you asked the question, you have ideas about this, right? So I haven't looked at that. It isn't something which I have studied or thought about here. I don't know the educational system in Austria. I don't know the whole tertiary, et cetera, system. All I really focused on is higher ed, in our Fachhochschulen and the ETA level. This is where we're looking at. The other one is a fish that I can't even begin to catch, right? And so for me, as we're looking at this issue of hybrid and we're looking at the personalization of education, I think we have an awful lot to think. We're already thinking an awful lot about the implications that has on how we teach, what we teach, where we teach, who teaches, who researches, who learns. So there's all these questions already happening now at the Hochschule level that I can't even begin to go on that one. I can't go on that journey yet. Maybe another year or two, once I've sort of got my head around this, where things might be heading within our system here, and then you and I could have a probably more interesting conversation than I can give you about that right now.
It's a very interesting question.
No,
A very interesting question.
Sir Ken Robinson was actually a friend.
School system looks like from the industrial
I totally
age.
agree.
It's structured that way.
Yeah.
And there are difficult questions.
Yeah.
It's really it's difficult.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think many people feel that the school system brings not the best out of human.
Yeah. No, I agree with like 90% of what you're implying. I don't know how to answer your question, which is how to go about that.
Yeah, my thought was maybe you have some influence on the committee that counsels the parliament on these issues. But
Yeah, less.
You're on the right place.
Yeah.
We invite you in 2 years and talk about educational system,
Okay,
the future of
sure.
educational
I'm
system.
sooner than that.
Maybe I can add one thought to this, because I have been an headmistress of a Swiss Kantonsschule, and school system is one of the most resilient systems to change, like public administration, because now I'm a consultant for schools and public administration and firms, and it's incredible. They speak about revolution in the school, but they still manage it in 55 minutes slots. And the reform of schools is nearly impossible. It's incredible. And even some new schools or new forms of schools don't get fixed into the whole school system.
We will put the future of education on the agenda.
I would
for
welcome that.
another time.
I think that'd be great. Seriously.
I slowly want to come to an end. Is there one more question? Is it to the school system?
Yeah, it was just an observation. At the Institut d'études politiques in Paris, IUP, the lecture units are 90 minutes.
Okay, this makes a big change. One last question. We have someone responsible for strategic foresight and one of the world's leading universities. We have one responsible for foresight, strategic foresight at EU Commission. Regarding your mandate, regarding what you heard from each other tonight, what do you think is very similar in your job, and where are the differences in these different institutions?
I think it's quite interesting that we both have complex members. I think there's a similarity to that in how, I have 500 faculty, each one is an independent entity. Then we have departments, research institutions, so there's so many entities who are having their own strategies, and it's just like this herding cats, really smart, motivated cats. I think, and yet there is a desire amongst all to be the best that we can be, right? So I think there's a bit of, I think, and that might be the
similarity.
There's this complexity. I think a dissimilarity might be you have a minister of the future from each country and I don't.
There would be a responsible person in every department for the future.
And I don't have that.
Yeah, you don't have that.
Yeah,
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
Greg, where do you see the similarities and the differences?
No, I guess can simply echo what Chris said. I think the life of foresighter, one hand is very exciting. On the other hand, is sometimes quite frustrating as well, where you have to convince many people, or at least try to have a bit more open conversation about some of the topics that are maybe not looking that bright. But again, I think what's really exciting, and I think Chris can share this as well, is this ability, or the possibility, sorry, to try to influence how the future, hopefully better one, might look.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We come to an end, and are you inviting for the apéro, or?
I just invite you to go to the apéro.
Okay. So, thank you.